Hi guys, it's Miss Chronister again. We are in week 2 of freshman English. So 1 week down, now we're in week 2. A little disclaimer, if you noticed, I'm wearing the same outfit as the last video. It's not because I only have one outfit because I'm a poor teacher. I just am doing these videos back to back. So it's actually the same day when I'm recording. I know it's a different day for you. But that's why I haven't changed clothes. So I'm going to go over the assignments that you need to do this week. Again, look at the pacing guide, but more importantly, look at my announcements. My announcements are a little more detailed than the pacing guide. And if you watch this video, I kind of work through them with you and give you guys some examples so you don't feel like you're lost, all right? So the first assignment is 1.5. It's called Defining Experiences. You're going to read through this short story, Marigolds. And you probably know in English we call things short stories when they're really not that short. So it's going to take you a little bit of time to read through this story. But here's the thing, you need to fill out a graphic organizer when you're doing this story. So open up the graphic organizer. I've got a copy of it in the announcements so you know what you're expected to do. And then while you're reading, you can fill out the graphic organizer. So when you're done reading, the graphic organizer is done and then that part of your assignment is done, all right? Then you don't have to like read through the story, then go back and reread it to get the information you need. So as you read, you're going to fill out this graphic organizer that looks at diction and imagery. Do you guys remember last week we kind of talked about diction, which is word choice, the words that the speaker chooses to use. Those convey how the person feels. Remember the guy who was like, dude, I love pizza. The words he chose gave us an impression of how he feels about pizza. So the same thing happens in this story. Also, it talks about imagery, the way a person paints the picture, the way a person looks at something and tells us about it, also tells us what their attitude is about that. So you're going to go through this. We're going to look at the opening together. So I'm going to read the opening of Marigolds to you, and we'll work through this together so you know how I want you guys to do the rest of the graphic organizer. Then you can continue to read, and with her first encounter with Miss Lottie, you can go through and do the same thing that we're going to do here in the opening part of the short story together. So this is Marigolds. Here's the first paragraph. I'm going to read it here. When I think of the hometown of my youth, all that I seem to remember is dust. The brown, crumbly dust of late summer. Arid, sterile dust that gets into the eyes and makes them water. Gets into the throat and between the toes of bare brown feet. I don't know why I should remember only the dust. Surely there must have been lush green lawns and paved streets under leafy shade trees somewhere in town, but memory is an abstract painting. It does not present things as they are, but rather as they feel. And so when I think of that time in that place, I remember only the dry September of the dirt roads and grassless yards of the shanty town where I lived. And one other thing I remember, another incongruency of memory, a brilliant splash of sunny yellow against the dust. Miss Lottie's Marigolds. So there's the opening. And it already sounds like she doesn't really like her hometown, right? She like paints this picture. I kind of talked about it. You guys can see my example on the announcement, but she's like, all I seem to remember is dust. And if it weren't enough just to say dust, she was like the brown, crumbly dust. So she even goes on to describe the dust. So that gives us some imagery, but it also shows us what she thought about it. We can kind of tell her attitude. She didn't like the dust. She doesn't really like her hometown. She's like, yeah, maybe there was something nice about it, but all I remember is the dust. Talks about grassless yards. She calls it a shanty town, which also that word doesn't have much good connotation with it. So she kind of paints this picture of this just like, I wouldn't want to live there. But I also like, and I didn't put this into my example, but I also like how she has the juxtaposition. It talks about juxtaposition in the margin of your springboard activity there. She has this dust that is ugly, right? But then there's those beautiful marigolds. So pay attention to those as you continue to read. But with her speech already, with her word choice, we can already get a feel for her attitude towards her town, right? So clearly she doesn't like the place. That's what I put in my example for the opening. You guys can copy my opening if you want to. Because that's what we would do if we were doing this in class together. We would do the first one as a team. So now you guys are going to continue to read and do exactly what I just did. Pull out phrases, pull out the word choice she has that convey what kind of attitude she has toward in each of these situations, the closing or when she overhears the conversation. So continue through reading and answer the other half of the graphic organizer. Then after you're done with the graphic organizer, you're going to do the check your understanding. It's a writing prompt, all right? So you're going to write 2 paragraphs for me. So it says, describe the voice of the narrator, then explain how the writer's diction and imagery, so how their word choice and the pictures they create for us, create this voice. You might also mention other literary elements such as juxtaposition that contribute to the narrator's voice or the point of view. So here's what I want you to do. In your first paragraph, this is probably going to be a shorter paragraph. You're just going to tell me overall, what was her like attitude like? What kind of tone do you get from our author, from our narrator? And then, so you're going to have like a thesis statement, like in the story Marigolds, the narrator seems to have whatever attitude, you know, or whatever tone you want to put in there. Then in your second paragraph, I want you to pull at least 3 specific places from the story that support that she has that attitude. So 3 things she said that gave you that vibe, or pieces of imagery, that like pictures she created for us that show us what kind of attitude or tone she has in this story. All right. Next, 1.6. So this is where you'll start to see how our embedded assessment, remember we talked about that last week in the blog. The embedded assessment that we're going to do is an interview, and you're going to do a practice interview for 1.6. So you're going to find somebody and interview them. It could be your mom, it could be your brother, it could be whoever. Grab somebody in your house and sit them down. So one thing that's really important with interviews is asking your interviewee open-ended questions. All right, you can't just ask them questions that have yes or no answers, then, because if you do, your interview is gonna be so boring, right? So for 1.6, you're going to go through all these steps, numbers 1 through 10. So just go through all of these. Like number 1 says, the first thing you need is your interviewee's name. So you just write down their name. Number 1, check, done. Then you're going to create 4 questions. Those 4 questions you might want to just write in this graphic organizer. This graphic organizer, see this? This is on page 26 in the Springboard activity for activity 1.6. So they give you a little graphic organizer there where you can write down your questions. Make sure they're good open-ended questions. So whatever you're interviewing your person about, you get some good juicy answers. So go through all this, and you're going to ask your interviewee these questions. All right. Then the last thing you're going to do, you don't have to do number 10, but number 10 has some good bullets with some good pieces of information for you. But in number 9, back up. Somebody just walked through here and it kind of threw me for a loop because I think they think I'm crazy because I'm talking to my phone. So if you heard that commotion, that's what it was. Anyway, so you're going to write your interview down. You're going to ask this person 4 great open-ended questions. Then you're going to write this interview out. So I know a lot of these things in these Springboard activities say, in front of your class, you're going to introduce your person. Well, we don't, this isn't a traditional class, so we can't really introduce people over the internet yet, but you're going to write out your interview. And I did this on the announcement, so you can look at my example. The only difference between mine and yours is I did just 2 questions, just because I didn't want your announcements to be like ridiculously long because I'm writing all these examples in. So you'll see I have an introduction where I introduce my person that I'm going to interview. Then I have like a little body paragraph for each question. And then I have a closing, which is just a couple sentences. So model your interview after me, and you're going to write out this interview that you did with your person as if you are presenting it into a class. So mine just says, I would like everybody to meet my husband, Adam Cronister. Adam has a great passion, traveling. While he has traveled to many places around the world, he claims that it will never be enough. It is his life's goal to see as much of the world as possible. So that's my like little introduction. Then I go into my questions. One of the first things I asked Adam was where his passion for traveling came from. It began with a trip to Puerto Vallarta. It was my first step out of America, and that's all it took, he said. He had never been out of his small town of Yakima, so traveling abroad was pretty exciting. Once he saw there was much more to the world than in his tiny town, the different culture, the incredible food, the interesting people, he was hooked. So you guys are going to go through and do that same thing. So I have a little introduction. I have a paragraph for each question. And then I have a closing. I just said talking with Adam about his love for traveling was fascinating. His love for seeing other places got me thinking about my next vacation. So I want you guys to create that same thing that I did, except I want you to have all 4 questions, all right? So you're gonna have an introduction, a little paragraph about each question that you asked your interviewee, and then a closing. Notice it wants you to create some parallel structure, some examples of parallel structure. So in each of my question paragraphs, I threw one of those in. Once he saw there was much more to the world in his tiny town, the different culture, the incredible food, the interesting people, he was hooked. So there I had a little list with parallel structure in it. I also have quotes directly from him that I put in there, and then also stuff that I paraphrased in my own words. You guys are going to do the same thing. So make sure you have quotes from the person that you interview. That means you're probably going to have to be taking notes while you're interviewing them. And that little graphic organizer that they gave you for number 5 will help you with that. So model yours after mine and you'll do great. All right. Then lastly, all right, activity 1.6. So it's another, it's like a document. You know how last week we had the document where we did the compound and complex sentences. This week it's another document. It's called Punctuating Dialogue. Since you're going to be including quotes, it's important to include them and punctuate them correctly. So, you know, when you quote somebody, you put in quotes, right? So you will see that I did that correctly when I was interviewing Adam. Make sure you do it correctly. If somebody just says a regular statement, you put it in quotes, and inside the quote you put a comma to end it. So comma, quote, and then said my mom or whatever, or said Adam. So if it's just a sentence, just a statement, like what you would normally put a period after, you put a comma inside the quotes, and then you put in that speaker tag, said mom or exclaimed Brandon or whatever. If it's like an exclamatory thing, you can put in an exclamation mark, or if it's a question, you put in a question mark. But you always make sure your punctuation goes inside the quotes. Also, another rule is you need to start a new paragraph whenever somebody new speaks. So if you look in a book, or maybe you can like look back in the Marigolds, whenever somebody new spoke, you'd do it drop down a line, indent, and quotes. So it's a new paragraph every time somebody new speaks. That's how you can kind of know as a reader that the speaker is changing. And then another little note here, it says use ellipses or dashes to show pauses or sudden breaks in speech. If you're interviewing somebody, they might just like sit there and pause like they're thinking. So you can reflect that in your writing by putting the ellipses. Those are just 3 dots, or you could put a dash. But that gives us like that feel that, okay, they were pausing here and kind of putting some thought into this. So review those. You can look through the page, the 1.6 document that you download to get those rules. And then your assignment for this is under the check your understanding. It says to write a short dialogue between 2 or 3 people, punctuating the quotes correctly. All right, so you're just gonna make this up, or you could like reenact a conversation that your family had at the dinner table, or a time your mom yelled at you. Hopefully there's not too many times to choose from. But I want you guys to write at least 7 sentences, all right, of characters going back and forth in dialogue, because I want to see that you guys can punctuate that correctly. All right, so that's all your assignments for this week. So as always, if you have any questions, let me know. In my announcements, there's some examples. Make sure you're only doing what I ask you to do. Sometimes in these springboard activities, there are many different like little number 1 quick write. I don't want you guys to do all of that, just what I ask you to do, okay? So make sure you're following those directions so you don't wind up doing extra work. And ask me any questions you have, all right? Come see me if you're at U High, or if you need some help, give me a call during office hours, all right? Take care. Talk to you guys next week.